continue our series in Titus, and so if you want to turn to Titus, if you want to find that would be great. And doing a series called Folks Like Us, just about normal, everyday people, and so and how God uses us. So what a great testimony to kind of lead into that. You know, leaders are always important, and but I think in times of chaos or tragedy or crisis, we realize the importance of leaders even more. You know, over the past few weeks in our own country, we have seen just crisis and tragedy. We have seen that, I mean, believe it or not, we are still wrestling with the stain that the sin of slavery has left on our country. And it's a deep problem that involves racism and lack of respect for authority and fear on all sides and painful histories. You know, there's kind of a cyclical thing to this deal that, we've seen how police officers are stereotyped. We've seen how black males are stereotyped. And after two situations where black men were killed in what seemed like routine encounters, many people in the country thought we were a powder keg ready to blow. And then when we all watched in horror of the Dallas police officers being shot, we worried perhaps that would be what set off that powder keg. Yet leaders began to emerge through that situation, if you paid attention, that there were leaders who emerged who refused to go to the extremes that I think pundits and politicians often force us to try to make, to go to the extremes. One man, I don't know if you saw any of the news conference, but Brian Williams is a black man who's a trauma surgeon at Parkland Hospital where the officers were treated. And he shared honestly during this news conference, he said, I didn't even expect to say anything, and yet he began to share honestly about his own experiences, tough experiences he's had with police officers because he's a black male, and he felt like he was profiled. Yet in the same news conference, he shared about his admiration for the Dallas officers, how he's been grieving for them, how he grieved with them that night as they were standing in waiting rooms and as he had to go tell families that their loved ones did not make it. And there was one point where I don't know if it was planned or not by the officers, but an ambulance was bringing in another officer who was shot, and the officers lined up as kind of an honor thing behind the ambulance as they're wheeling in the injured officer. And Dr. Williams got in line. He said, I didn't know if I was supposed to or not, but I felt like I needed to honor these men, and so I stood in line with them. At one point, he said this during the conference, this experience has been very personal for me and a turning point in my life. There was the added dynamic of officers being shot. He said, here at Parkland, we routinely care for multiple gunshot victims, but the preceding days of black men dying at the hands of police officers affected me. He goes, I think the reasons are obvious. I fit the demographic of individuals, but I abhor what has been done to these officers. I grieve for their families. He was choking back tears as he spoke. I understand the anger and frustration and distrust, but they are not the problem. The problem is a lack of open discussions about the impact of race relations in this country. And then he simply said, this killing has to stop. I'd already finished the sermon and the notes, but on my way home Friday, I heard an interview, just happened to turn on the radio, and Dr. Williams was being interviewed, and it was interesting because he began to share his own feelings and said, I don't like how I feel because of past experiences. I still carry that with me when I'm around police officers, and he has a young daughter, and he says, I have chosen every time I see a police officer, I take my daughter over and we say hi. I buy ice cream for officers. If I see them at a restaurant, I buy their meals. And he said, because I don't want my daughter to have the same feelings that I have. I want her to feel comfortable around the police and to respect them. I thought that was an amazing balanced thing that he said. Many of you saw how leaders make a difference during hard times through David Brown, the Dallas police chief. He has the unique perspective because he is a black man. He's a police chief of a major city, and he has lost tragically. He's lost friends during this last incident in Dallas, but he's also lost friends and loved ones to violence. As a black man, he knows the talk that black fathers give their 16-year-old boys on how to act, where to put their hands, how to respond when they're pulled over. My guess is none of us have ever had that talk. I'm teaching my son, Jesse, how to drive, which, by the way, increases your prayer life. But I have never talked to him about what to do and how to act if he gets pulled over. Doesn't even occur to me. And yet I'm telling you that black fathers, I've talked to black pastors who they have that talk routinely with their sons. Chief Brown knows that. He also knows what it's like to be a police officer and to see people give a lack of respect for police. He sees parts of the city that are dangerous criminal havens. He knows all too well of tragedy in his own family. In 1988, he went to investigate a crime scene. After being promoted, he was no longer with his police partner. He was promoted to investigation. He shows up at a crime scene. He sees familiar pairs of glasses laying on the ground, goes around the corner, and he finds his partner who has been shot and is in grave condition. He sat with his partner's children at the hospital when the doctor came out to give them the news that their dad did not make it. He knows tragedy. In 91, Chief Brown's brother was murdered by drug dealers in Phoenix, and on Father's Day 2010, his own son, acting erratically, walked outside in his boxers, socks, and sunglasses, shot a dad who had just pulled into the apartment complex with his family. He ended up shooting and killing the first police officer who showed up to the scene, and then he himself was killed as more police showed up. So Chief Brown speaks from a unique perspective of a longtime police veteran, a police chief, a black man, and a person who suffered tragedy. As Atlantic Magazine put it, when Brown spoke, he displayed grace, competence, selfless purpose. He exuded gentle humor, humility, civility, and inner strength. He challenged us to work together. He asked protesters to be a part of the solution by joining the police department. He asked Americans to show police respect. He acknowledged that we're asking the police system to do too much to try to solve racism on its own. And then he spoke about his faith. I'm a person of faith. I'm here today as a testimony of God's grace and his sweet, tender mercies. After a year and a half of our country looking for a presidential candidate, it was interesting that after David Brown spoke, the hashtag Chief Brown for President took off, and for a while was the number one trending hashtag on Twitter. Why? Because people are hungry for real, open, honest leaders. Leaders who aren't afraid to speak the truth and give direction, yet that does it in such a way that invites conversation and understanding. We look for leaders. Leadership is important, but not just on a national scene or a global scene. We look for it in our personal lives. Think about your life. Think about the workplace that, if you work, think about the workplace that you're in. If you're looking for a job, often you're looking for somebody who's a good boss, who's a good leader, or there's a good coworker around you that can lead you in how to do your job. If you have a poor workplace, you can almost always trace it back to poor leadership. Think about the strength we gain from leadership in our lives. Think about it from your younger years. Many of you are where you're at today, that you could trace it back to a mom or a dad who was a strong leader in your life. I talk to adults, even middle-aged adults, older adults, who will point back to a teacher who believed in them and spoke into their lives and helped to lead them, and that charted their life onto a good course, That's the importance of good leadership. Now, we've also seen, all of us have seen the impact of poor leadership on children when they don't get the parental leadership that they deserve and need. Leaders are important spiritually. What kind of leaders should you be looking for to help you in your walk with Christ? What kind of men or women should you look for? That component of your life, your spiritual life, is going to impact all the other areas of your life. So it's important. Who should lead? There are some in this room who are called to lead small group or a ministry group or even perhaps be a pastor, an elder of a church, or part of a church planning team. What should your goal be as you prepare for leadership? Others of you lead at work. You lead on a factory line, or you lead one other person, or you serve as a manager or a team leader. I know several business owners who see themselves not only as business owners, but they've begun to look at themselves as, I'm a pastor of these employees. I know someone that owns multiple restaurants, and she looks at herself as a pastor who are employees, are people she needs to shepherd and help out in life and to give direction. Yes, they still need to make a profit and do good business standards, but she also sees that this is an opportunity to lead people. If you influence one person, then you're a leader. You may not lead the masses ever, but you're leading someone and you have influence. Now, good leaders can be hard to find, right? I mean, it can be tough to find good leaders, But we want to find out what we should be looking for and how to find good leaders and how we could be good leaders. Can folks like us lead? That's a question we're going to answer today. And who should we be looking for to lead us? Well, I told you to go ahead and turn to Titus. You remember, if you were here last week, that this is an inspired letter of God that Paul wrote to Titus. Paul and Titus had a great missionary journey. They had showed up on this island in the Mediterranean of Crete. It had a very poor reputation of being very rough people. It would be, for most of us, we would say it's an unpromising place to go, and yet they had great fruit there. Many people became Christians around the island, and Paul needed to keep moving on to other churches that he had planted, so he goes back to the mainland to Macedonia and Greece, but he leaves Titus behind to organize the churches and to get leadership in order. And so in this letter to Titus, he reminds him of the unfinished business of appointing leaders and what kind of leaders we should look for. So let's answer these questions. Can folks like us lead in this room, and who should we be looking for to lead us? Titus 1, verse 5, the reason I left you, Titus, in Crete, was that you might put in order what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. Now, right off the bat, we can answer our first question. Can folks like us lead? Remember last week, we talked about guys like Paul, who was anti-Christian. He persecuted Christians. Guy like Titus, who was a total outsider, grew up totally away from God, had never heard of God or Jesus. And then the Cretans, who their own poets described as lazy, evil brutes and liars. From that group, Paul says, pick leaders. It is possible, I think what this passage tells us, it is possible to get past our past, and it is possible to get past whatever labels you have put on yourself or other people have put on you in order to become a leader. That Paul says, even from this group that everybody else thought was unpromising, we have seen over the last few months, because they've only been saved a few months, possibly a year, but not very long. From this group, people had begun to be transformed. And not only were they transformed to the point they could be trusted to lead others into transformation. Folks like us not only get to play, folks like us can lead. Even folks like us can get to lead. Well, if that's true, then what kind of characteristics should we have in our lives? What kind of characteristics is God looking for? What kind of gifting is God looking for in leaders? Take a look at verse 6. An elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe and are not open to the charge of being wild and disobedient. Since an overseer manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message that has been taught, so that he can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. Now, before we break this down totally, I'm just going to go over a few quick concepts to get us going. First is just two words that are used here in this passage to describe leaders, elder and overseer. The word for elder is translated from the Greek word presbyteros, where we get kind of the word Presbyterian. In its literal form, it just simply means older. In ancient cultures, and still in quite a few of the majority world around the world, they still have this, is that older people are revered, and they were revered in the ancient world. And just because they were revered as being older and having wisdom, eventually the word older became associated with the word leader, or what they call here an elder. The word overseer comes from the word episcope, where we get the word episcopal. It means to oversee, to view, to visit, to guard, to inspect. And the words seem to be used interchangeably in the New Testament. Overseer, pastor, and elder all seem to be the same kind of concept in the New Testament. And in the New Testament, it's important to understand this. In the New Testament, especially since it was a young church just getting off the ground, there was no real established offices yet. Function came before office or title. So what people would see is they would see somebody who was leading, who was giving oversight, who was caring for a group of people, and then they would give them the title of pastor or elder or overseer. They didn't come into the office and then expect to get those gifts or those qualities about their life. People would see the function first, and then they would get the office or the role. Does that make sense? The title isn't going to give anybody these characteristics. They're supposed to already have them, and then people just notice them. The founder of the Vineyard Movement, John Wimber, was once asked, what do you look for when you're looking for elders? And his quote back to them was simply, I'm looking for elders who eld. I don't know what that means, but I think what he was trying to say was, I'm just looking for people who are already doing it. Like, who are people already pastoring and shepherding people? Who are people already caring for people? Who are the ones already doing it, that they don't need a title, they don't need an office. I'm just looking for the people who are already doing it, and then I give them that. One other word I should say is, before we dive in, you'll notice the passage is written in the masculine, but I believe it applies to men and women. There are plenty of women leaders in the New Testament church, even apostles that have been named that are women. But often in the New Testament church, elders were mainly men. Paul's kind of overriding guide when he was spreading the gospel is he didn't want to do anything to impede the spread of the gospel. And Christ and Paul opened up leadership to women more than anybody else, especially more than the surrounding culture allowed. But at the same time, Paul didn't want some cultural revolution to be the focus and not the gospel. So they kept pressing out the gospel, changing the way people viewed other classes of people and how men would view women. And I think they knew that as the gospel took off and hearts were changed, eventually there would be total equality with women. And so that was kind of the end game. But the way they were going to do that is to push the gospel and allow hearts to change and then allow that to happen. So it was kind of this tension they lived in of opening up more and more roles for women than they had ever had, but at the same time making sure that it didn't become a sticking point for people to accept Jesus. In the Vineyard, we believe leadership is based on character and gifting, not on gender. So women, we would encourage you to go ahead and apply these verses to your life too, and to aspire to leadership. Now, verse 6, as we dive in, verse 6 doesn't get translated all that well in the English. It makes it look like statements, but actually in the original, it's more like questions. So these are questions. Paul says, Titus, you should be asking yourself and asking of the people you're looking at to lead. You should be asking, is he blameless? Is he a one-woman man? Does he have obedient children, or are they given to debauchery or living sexually loose lives? That's kind of what the word wild there means. It's the word debauchery. Throughout the letters of Titus and 1st and 2nd Timothy, Paul has an utmost concern of how is the gospel going to be looked at by outsiders, and he doesn't want a leader's life to give anybody an excuse to not accept Jesus. Now, the word blameless doesn't mean perfect. It simply means unimpeachable or living above reproach. They're known as a person with good integrity. Paul tells Titus, look at their lives. Are these potential leaders, are they the kind of people you would want other people to copy? Whether they're single, married with kids, wherever they find themselves in life, are they living an exemplary Christian single life, Christian married couple life, Christian family life? After these clear initial things, Paul then rattles off 5 vices to avoid and 6 virtues to attain. Leaders shouldn't be, take a look at those verses 6 through 9. Leaders shouldn't be overbearing or self-willed. They shouldn't be quick-tempered. When it comes to alcohol, they don't need to be abstainers, but they shouldn't be given to drunkenness, which is always a sin in the Bible. They shouldn't be violent. They shouldn't use their position to try to make a profit off of people. But they should be, and here's the virtues, they should be hospitable. They should love good works. They should be self-controlled. That word self-controlled there means they should have their wits about them. They should be even-keeled people, not prone to wild swings or big highs and lows. They should have their wits about them. They should be upright, holy, and disciplined. And verse 9 says they should be devoted to the gospel. False teachers were beginning to rise up in the island of Crete, and people were spending their time focused on all these peripheral issues, and Paul wanted to make sure that they would hold firmly to the kind of the main and the plain in the middle of this trustworthy message of the good news of Jesus. They would have sound doctrine. It's a medical term that literally means healthy doctrine. They wouldn't have any disease in their doctrine. They would be healthy, because Paul knew healthy doctrine, healthy belief will lead to good behavior. Now, perhaps it's the context of writing this young church or writing a group of people that's only known Christ for a few months, maybe a year, but Paul hardly touches on gifting, doesn't he? Like, just skim through those verses again and see, how many things do you see that have anything to do with gifting as a leader? Just a couple. He says they need to be good household managers. That was a technical term back then. People who had some means about them, had some money, they often had household managers. There would be a porter who would be the lead porter. There would be cooks who would be the head cook. There would be a landscape manager. And they needed to know how to do the tasks, but they also needed to lead the group of people they needed to be able to lead all the cooks. So the landscape manager needed to lead all the landscapers, or the household manager needed to be able to lead all those people. And Jesus says leaders in the church are like the same. They're stewards of God's house. If God has given you one person to influence, or a small group to influence, or a ministry team to influence, or you lead a preschool class and you're influencing preschoolers, or if you're a pastor or an elder, then we are stewarding God's people, His house for Him. We're overseeing it for Him. And so there needs to be some leadership gifting there, obviously. And there needs to be an ability to teach, Paul says in those verses, to be able to refute heresy and false teaching. But those are really just the two skills that are mentioned in all of that. When Paul is saying, Titus, here's what I want you to look for, he just gives like two little giftings. I don't know if I say they're little, they're important. To be able to manage people, lead people, to be able to teach to some degree, to be able to refute heresy, to know the gospel. But the bulk of the airplay goes to character, not charisma, not gifting. Why is that, do you think? Obviously you got to have gifting, right? If you're a leader and you're taking and you look behind you and there's nobody following you, then you're just taking a walk, right? You're not really a leader. Somebody better be following you. If you're wrestling with, am I a leader or not? Just start asking you, is anybody following me? It's a pretty easy test. No office, no title is going to change that. You need to be leading already. People need to be following you already before you ever get a title or a position. I get that. I understand that. But why is Paul so honed in on character? Because character always, I want you to walk away with this today, character always outweighs gifting. Think about it. Let's think about it in the positive. I bet you would follow a leader who has average gifting if they had exemplary character. Like you'd say, yeah, they could be better. Joe could do a better job leading. He could preach better. But if I had great character, you'd still follow, I bet. What if the opposite was true? What if I just had incredible gifting, but I had shady character? You might last a little bit, right? Just because, it was good gifting, yeah. But eventually, my bad character would betray whatever great gifting I had. That's how it works anywhere, right? Is that how it works at the office? You could have a stellar boss. They are gifted. They can manage people. They can do all the stuff. They know the job. They're great. They're intelligent. And at first you may think, this is a great place to work. They are so gifted, so talented. But if they have poor character, after a while, poor character always betrays great gifting. You will run away. You will look for another job. You will look for one that pays less. Nobody wants to be led by somebody that has poor character, right? The other reason that character trumps gifting is this. Think about this. What's the ripple effect of a leader when they fall? What's the ripple effect in a family when a leader in the family, a matriarch or a patriarch, when they fall? Your workplace, a team leader falls. A small group leader falls. Ripple effect, right? That's why Paul says you got to look for character. Character always outweighs gifting. It's remarkable, even folks like us. I loved Amy's testimony of just regular, average person. But she said, yes, even folks like us get to lead. But God is looking for folks whose character outweighs their gifting. People like Paul and Titus and even Cretans are folks who get to be called into ministry and to lead. Don't discount yourself because of your past or where you come from, but do remember this. The most important thing is your character. Are you being transformed? How does your family life look like? How do your friendships look like? Are you stewarding the influence that you already have? Are you stewarding that well? You know, even minor character flaws and cracks can be exploited by the enemy. I remember early on in doing a church plant that we had someone on the team, a dear friend, and yet we had seen this was kind of like looking back after some incidents has happened. We saw minor character flaws that we let go. A little spin of the truth here and there, a little what might some people call a white lie, taking a little longer lunch break than they wrote down, spending a little more time out of the office than he let his boss know. But all other areas of his life looked good, and gifting was there. But it wasn't long into the plant before the enemy worked his way into those cracks like water exploits cracks in concrete. And over time, those character issues became major issues that caused him to lose his job and his marriage and his friends. Even folks like us, all of us can lead to some degree. But remember, it's a leader's character that outweighs a leader's gift. Character will always betray gifting. How could you apply this to your life real quickly? I want to wrap up and get to worship. Number one, I want you to keep praying for the 5 people. Here's the remarkable thing. If you weren't here last week, we encouraged people to pray for 5 unpromising people to come to the gospel. Because Paul and Titus and Cretans, they were all unpromising, and yet that's who God chose to reveal himself to and accepted the gospel. So we've been asking people to pray during this series, this 8-week series out of Titus. We're asking you to pray for those 5 people. If not every day, several times a week, just keep praying, and we want to see what happens. Here's the remarkable thing. Some of those 5 people are probably leaders in a church one day. It's not just that they can get saved. It's that they may be the next church planter, the next small group leader, the next person to work in teen ministry, the next person to serve at food pantry, the next person who's a worship leader. You just don't know. Next pastor. So some of those 5 are leaders. Because even folks like us get to lead. And if folks like us get to be a part of it, then who knows what God has for those people on your list. Also, as you're praying for them this week, I want you to picture one thing. We were going to have baptisms today, and nobody went to the interest meeting, so we're not going to have it. But I went ahead and wheeled this up here because I was thinking about that, and nobody signing up, which that's not a pressure statement. I'm just saying that's just what happened. Nobody signed up. I want you to imagine you baptizing one of those 5 people here someday. Imagine as you pray for them and you get to lead them to Jesus. And one day you're here baptizing them because you believe that even folks like them could get saved. So picture that as you're praying this week. Not only that they may be leaders, but I want you to picture that you could be baptizing them someday. Number 2, I want you to accept the call. There are people in this room that it is simply time to step up and to begin to lead. You've been sitting too long, to use family language. You've been too long in the high chair or the booster seat. Time to move up another chair. And then you look back for the person in the high chair or the booster seat and you help them. So accept the call. What call has God put on your life to lead? Maybe it's to lead your spouse or to lead your children or an extended family. Maybe God has put you in a certain place in the workplace, certain position, and He's asking you to step up and to lead, to use your influence that He's given you. It may just be to lead one other person. God has put one person in your life you're supposed to be leading and help them. Then lead. New leaders are always needed for small groups. You heard Amber make the announcement. Next week, new small group leader training. We'd love to get several new small groups going this fall, and Sean will teach you how to do that on July 24th, 31st, and August 14th. New leaders are always needed in children's classes, or new leaders are needed to disciple people, or to lead people in new inner healing journeys, or teens who need new sponsors who can walk alongside of them and model what it looks like to be a godly adult. I just think God has great ministries planned for this church in the future that'll need leaders. People who can make disciple-making disciples, people who can push out further inner healing ministries, people who can work with addicts, people who can equip people to do what Jesus did, people who will be a part of church planting teams or plant new churches themselves. But it's going to take leaders to do those things. If God is calling you, I want you to accept the call. God is looking for household managers, stewards, people who, whether he gives you 1 to influence or 50 or 500 to influence, doesn't matter. He is looking for people to stand up and say, I will help influence somebody else. I will lead. Last application, number 3. Read Titus 1, 5 through 9 this week and ask yourself, which of these character issues could trip me up from being used by God? Like when he says self-control, or are you blameless? Are you gentle? All the different things he says about character, the vices we should avoid and the virtues we should accept. Which of those could trip you up from being used by God? Do some soul searching. Read that. You got to read it daily. Ask God, highlight which one of these is kind of might even just be a minor crack in my integrity, but the enemy could weasel in there and use it. Ask the Lord to show you how to get that healed. Here's the amazing thing. On all those, the 5 vices and the 6 virtues, every one of those is under your control. Like you might say, I don't think I'm a leader. I don't think I have a gift. Okay, great. If you're not a leader, I get that. Some people do have some gift, some people don't. I bet you lead somebody. But irregardless if you think you're a leader or not, you have the control over how godly you're going to be. You have control over how much virtue you're going to have in your life and how much vice you're going to have in your life. That's totally under your control. So begin to do some business with God this week and say, God, whether you want to use me as a leader or not, these things are going to trip me up. Character will always betray me, a lack of character. And so which one of these would trip me up? You just begin to work through that this week and have him begin to highlight what you need to work on. And then read some verses about that. Take a concordance, try to find some verses on those vices or virtues. Or talk to a friend and say, hey, would you pray for me? The Lord highlighted this in my life that it needs taken care of. And I didn't even think about it, but when I prayed through it, read through this, the Spirit highlighted this. Help me. Even folks like us can lead. And here's the folks God is looking for to lead. God is looking for folks whose character outweighs their gifting. I want to go ahead and have the worship team come up front and get ready. When we began talking today, we said that people are looking for leaders in times of crisis. As the article that I quoted from said, we need gentle leaders during brutal times. I believe people are starved for leadership. And I could talk about that on the national scene and how people gravitate towards leaders or whatever, but that's not where the real action is for most of us. The real action is your coworker who's tried the world's way of life and is looking for a different way to live because they're weighed down. She's looking for someone to lead her into a different way of doing life. Will you lead her? It's your neighbors who are doing everything the world says to have fulfillment and happiness, and yet their marriage is broken. Will you lead them towards how to have a thriving marriage? It's the broken man who is cramming everything he possibly can into his wounds, hoping for relief. Will you lead him to wholeness? It's the person under enormous debt and financial pressure. Will you help lead them to godly financial responsibility and wholeness? It's your group of friends that are looking for somebody to show them how to have peace in a very anxious world. It's lost people, perhaps in another town in southeastern Ohio, looking for direction. Will you lead them by being a part of a church planting team? It's the teen who's looking for someone to believe in them and their future. Will you lead them to the one who holds their future in his hands, Jesus Christ? Or will you use the excuse that with your past you could never lead? Or will you allow character issues to remain in your life that will always betray your call? Or will you come to this realization? Even folks like us can lead, and God is looking for folks whose character outweighs their gifting. Let's go ahead and stand and worship the Lord. Amen.